had been discussing about the various theories of skepticism. We have just discussed the theory of Moreanism, and we are now discussing contextualism. This is Dr. Ananya Barua, Associate Professor in the Department of Philosophy, Hindu College, and we have been dealing with the paper on epistemology, which has been introduced by the University of Delhi for our third year students under DSC 18. Now, what is contextualism? The historical context of contextualism is a more recent development in epistemology, with philosophers like Desrose and David Lewis leading the charge in the 1990s. Contextualism emerged as a way to reconcile ordinary knowledge with the skeptical challenge by introducing the idea that the standards for knowledge vary depending on the context in which knowledge claims are made. Now, one of the most important things about contextualism is knowledge becomes a shifting game where it keeps on shifting as per the context. So, the core theory of contextualism is that whether or not someone knows something depends on the context of the conversation. In everyday situations, when stakes are low, we might rightfully claim knowledge. However, when the stakes are high, the standards of claiming knowledge becomes more stringent. In skeptical scenarios, the bar for knowledge is set higher and we cannot claim knowledge for external facts. So, the varieties of knowledge under contextualism in ordinary life states that we may be confident that we know we have hands, but in a skeptical context, we would need to meet more demanding criteria to claim knowledge. So, we see that the philosophical problem with contextualism is the challenge of fixing the threshold. The core challenge for contextualism is determining how much context matters in determining whether knowledge claims are true. Skeptical challenges push for higher threshold for knowledge, while ordinary contexts do not demand such rigor. So now, if we address the strengths and the weaknesses of contextualism, we see that flexibility is one of the strengths of contextualism, where it provides a nuanced approach to knowledge where it claims that it can account for different scenarios. It shifts the burden of proof depending on the context. The second strength of contextualism is that it avoids radical skepticism. Contextualism successfully avoids the paralyzing effect of radical skepticism by allowing knowledge claims to be context dependent. It maintains that we can know things in low stakes contexts while still acknowledging the challenge in more skeptical scenarios. Also, contextualism addresses the Morean paradox. Contextualism provides a way to understand why Moore's hand argument is not contradictory. It may simply be that the knowledge standards are different in everyday life versus skeptical scenarios. Now, when we discuss about the weaknesses of contextualism, the first and foremost that comes up is the shifting standards. Now, what is this shifting standards? Critics argue that contextualism undermines the idea of knowledge by suggesting that it is too context dependent. Knowledge claims become unstable and it becomes difficult to distinguish between knowledge and mere confidence. The nose problem. Second, contextualism might have trouble explaining why in certain skeptical contexts we cannot claim knowledge, even if we are confident in our ordinary knowledge. The problem of excessive skepticism. If skepticism introduces too high a threshold, contextualism may lead to excessive skepticism where knowledge becomes difficult to justify even in ordinary contexts. So we see that the weaknesses and the strengths of contextualism varies. If on the one hand contextualism is about flexibility, on the other hand it talks about shifting standards. On the other hand, if the strength of contextualism is about avoiding radical skepticism, the weakness of contextualism is the nose problem. Last, if it addresses the Moorean paradox as a strength of contextualism, the weakness of contextualism is the problem of excessive skepticism. Now, in this background, what is Pritchard's response? Pritchard is critical of contextualism, particularly because it does not offer a clear answer to the skeptical challenge. He argues that shifting standards do not sufficiently explain why we can know things in low-stakes contexts. Pritchard believes contextualism is too flexible as it does not provide a rigorous framework to justify knowledge claims. So then, what is the way out of Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism? Pritchard's disjunctivism offers a way forward. Unlike Mooreanism, which simply asserts knowledge, and contextualism, which adjusts standards, Pritchard argues that when we genuinely perceive something, we have direct access to the world. Even when we are deceived, we are in a fundamentally different epistemic state than when we have true perceptual knowledge. Now, this direct connection to reality means that even if skeptical scenarios are possible, they do not undermine our knowledge of the external world, because the epistemic situation in genuine perception is distinct from any skeptical hypothesis. So, we see that in Mooreanism, it provides a bold defense of common sense, but is criticized for being too dogmatic and lacking philosophical rigor. Contextualism offers a flexible and context-dependent approach, but risks making knowledge claims unstable and subject to excessive skepticism. Now, Pritchard's disjunctivism provides a stronger way to defend our knowledge without needing to shift standards or rely on dogmatic assertions, and it remains resistant to skepticism while acknowledging its force. Now we are good to go in comparing Mooreanism and contextualism in relation to skepticism and considering how Pritchard responds to both, for we have discussed these theories by and by. Mooreanism. In one line, we can say that it is bold but dogmatic. Strengths: simple and intuitive. Moore's approach is grounded in a common sense, which may make many people find appealing. It is easy to accept that we know we have hands and can assert this with confidence. Mooreanism's strength of being bold is also because for the reason that it is a direct attack on skepticism. Moore boldly asserts that we do know things about the world regardless of skeptical scenarios. This is a refreshing counterpoint to the paralyzing effects of radical skepticism. However, just like Mooreanism is bold, but it is also dogmatic. Some of the palpable dogmatism that this theory is being criticized of is a lack of justification. Moore's method does not explain why his knowledge claims are true. It merely asserts them. This can be seen as dogmatic and unphilosophical. Further, the weaknesses of Moore's Moorean theory can also be seen in the Moorean paradox, where his approach runs into the problem of self-contradiction, where the assertion that we know both that we have hands and that we cannot be brains in a vat doesn't seem coherent when subjected to philosophical scrutiny. Yet the other weakness of Moreanism is that it ignores skepticism's force. By simply asserting the truth of common sense, Moore does not engage deeply with the skeptical arguments themselves. This may seem like an easy way out without addressing the complexities of skepticism. So here Pritchard's response is interesting to note, for Pritchard argues that Moreanism is insufficient because it does not explain how we can justify knowledge claims in the face of skepticism. Moore simply denies skepticism without addressing its epistemological foundations. Hence, Pritchard favors a more sophisticated approach that engages with the skeptical challenge at a deeper level. Now, just like for Moreanism, we had said that it is bold but dogmatic in one line. Similarly, for contextualism, in one line we can say that it is flexible, but there are potentially unstable strengths. Flexible because contextualism introduces context-dependent knowledge thresholds, allowing us to claim knowledge in everyday situations while being more cautious in skeptical contexts. This offers a way to navigate between ordinary knowledge and the skeptical challenge. The other strength of contextualism is that it preserves ordinary knowledge. In low-stakes situations, contextualism allows for robust knowledge claims, preserving our everyday intuitions about knowledge while still addressing high-stakes skepticism by erasing the threshold of what counts as knowing. The other strength of contextualism is in addressing the Moorean paradox. Contextualism provides a way of understanding why Moore's assertions about knowledge in low-stakes situations do not conflict with the skeptical challenge in higher-stakes contexts. Knowledge standards vary depending on the contexts. Now, when we talk about the weaknesses about contextualism, which we had mentioned that it does have potentially unstable weaknesses, we are confronted with the first weakness, which is too context dependent, where critics argue that if knowledge standards change too much depending on the context, we lose the authenticity or the stability of what it means to know something. That is, the very concept of knowledge becomes self-defeated. The concept of knowledge becomes too flexible and may blur the line between mere belief and true knowledge. Second is that it does not fully resolve skepticism. While contextualism sidesteps some skeptical challenges, it does not offer a definitive solution to skepticism. The high threshold contexts still bring in skeptical doubt that can undermine certainty. 3. The risk of excessive skepticism. If the stakes are raised too high in a skeptical context, contextualism might overcorrect, and it can lead to excessive skepticism, making it hard to justify even ordinary claims of knowledges. So, Pritchard's response, we see that he would argue that contextualism lacks depth because it fails to address the real epistemic structure behind knowledge claims. While it provides a pragmatic solution in some cases, it fails to answer the deeper questions about how knowledge works, especially in extreme skeptical contexts. Like Moreanism, it does not give us the tools to justify knowledge in the face of skepticism. Now, we would be going ahead and discussing and seeing what is the overall assessment in this context of Pritchard's disjunctivism. And we see that, or the question rather, that we need to pick up at this stage is that, is Pritchard's disjunctivism a more sophisticated solution? We do see certain strengths, such as it's a direct engagement with skepticism, it avoids contextual shifting, it is resistant to radical skepticism. However, it is not free from weaknesses, and there are weaknesses in the form of complexity and practical application. Complexity because disjunctivism is more philosophically sophisticated than Moreanism and contextualism, but this can make it harder to understand and apply. Some critics argue that it introduces complexity without necessarily providing a clear solution to skepticism. Practical application, while theoretically sounding, disjunctivism's reliance on genuine perception may be hard to apply in real-world scenarios where perceptual evidence is often ambiguous or influenced by various cognitive biases. So, if then we are to question who did better in the skeptical challenge, who won, in other words, we would see that Moreanism is too simplistic and dogmatic. While it offers a quick dismissal of skepticism, it fails to engage with the deeper epistemic structures involved in skepticism. This makes it a less successful approach to addressing the problem of a philosophical level. Contextualism offers more flexibility, but this can come at the cost of stability. The idea that knowledge standards shift depending on context is attractive for preserving ordinary knowledge, but it does not adequately resolve the core issue of skepticism and may lead to excessive skepticism if taken too far. So, Pritchard's disjunctivism seems to offer a stronger solution because it directly addresses the epistemic situation in skeptical scenarios. Unlike Moreanism or contextualism, it provides a rigorous defense of knowledge that is resistant to skeptical challenges. While more complex, disjunctivism offers a clearer and more philosophically satisfying answer to skepticism by distinguishing genuine knowledge from deception or error. Thus, Pritchard's epistemological disjunctivism appears to offer the most robust response to skepticism, addressing both the nature of perception and the skeptical challenge in a way that Moreanism and contextualism fail to do. While disjunctivism may be more complex, it provides a stronger and more coherent answer to skepticism, making it the most successful approach, at least in this debate. So, quickly, if we look at this PPT, which is being displayed here, we see that the philosophical concepts, Moreanism, contextualism, and Pritchard's disjunctivism, the core response to skepticism of Moreanism is that if the formation of common sense knowledge, for the key proponent has been G.E. Moore, strengths have been intuitive, practical approach, it's a direct challenge to skepticism, its emphasis on common sense. On the other hand, about contextualism, the core response to skepticism is that it is context dependent knowledge threshold. Key proponent has been D. Rose, David Lewis. Strengths has been its flexible and nuanced approach. It preserves ordinary knowledge while acknowledging skepticism. And Pritchard's disjunctivism has been that it is a direct engagement with perception and skepticism. Key proponent is Duncan Pritchard. Strengths is that it provides a deep engagement with the skeptical challenge, distinguishes genuine knowledge from deceptive states. However, the weaknesses of the same are, for Moreanism, it is dogmatic and lacks philosophical depth, vulnerable to Morean paradox, it doesn't engage deeply with skepticism. The weakness of contextualism is that it is context-dependent knowledge which makes it unstable. It doesn't fully resolve skepticism. and it can lead to excessive skepticism. On the other hand, Pritchard's disjunctivism, though more palpably votable, it still has its lacuna, and some of these are, it is more complex and harder to understand, and it has a practical application which can be difficult. So, the philosophical concept of the nature of knowledge, when asked at this position, we see that Moreanism talks about the knowledge of the external world is self-evident in everyday life. Contextualism talks about knowledge claims are context dependent and vary based on stakes, and Pritchard's disjunctivism suggests genuine perceptual knowledge is distinct from any deceptive or skeptical scenarios. So, then how is the engagement with skeptical hypothesis? With Moreanism, we see it's a direct refutation without deeper justification. For contextualism, it adjusts the standards depending on the context, especially in skeptical scenarios. In Pritchard's disjunctivism, we see that the engagement with skeptical hypothesis, the perceptual knowledge cannot be undermined by skeptical scenarios because perception itself provides direct access to the world. The methodology for Moreanism is assertion based, where it directly affirms knowledge without argument. Contextualism is context adjustment, where knowledge claims depend on the context standards. And Pritchard's disjunctivism, the methodology is disjunctive, where it provides a philosophical framework distinguishing genuine perception from deceptive skepticism. So, the skeptical paradox of Moreanism has been that can we know both ordinary things and the skepticism hypothesis? Contextualism, the skeptical paradoxes can potentially lead to excessive skepticism if stakes are raised too high, and for Pritchard's disjunctivism, the skeptical paradox tries to resolve paradox by distinguishing genuine knowledge from deceptive scenarios. So, the philosophical concept of common sense versus radical skepticism. For Moreanism, we see that the common sense is the reliable source of knowledge. For contextualism, knowledge is stable in low stakes contexts, but skeptical scenario raise the bar, and Pritchard's disjunctivism quotes that knowledge gained through perception is immune to skepticism because this epistemic situation is different. So, what is the resolution then to skepticism? For Moreanism, the resolution to skepticism is that it refuses skepticism and stresses on common sense knowledge is enough. Contextualism's response to skepticism has been that it shifts the knowledge threshold based on context and stakes, and Pritchard's disjunctivism's response to skepticism is that it clarifies perceptual knowledge as it's immune to skeptical challenges. Thus, we see that there have been the various debates centering around these three key theories vis-a-vis skepticism, and by far the disjunctivism has been taken to be one of the most important theories of skepticism. Thus, to conclude, what then is the current status of disjunctivism? And we see that disjunctivism remains an important and vibrant part of the epistemological landscape, with Pritchard's work continuing to influence debates on skepticism, perception, and epistemic justification. While the theory has been refined by other philosophers, it still faces important criticisms, particularly regarding its general applicability and the challenges of explaining perception in light of modern cognitive science. However, its philosophical appeal, especially its direct realism and its focus on genuine knowledge, ensures that disjunctivism will continue to be a key player in discussions of skepticism, perception, and epistemology. in the coming years. So this is what we have discussed today, and hopefully the key takeaways, which is quickly, number one, we do not merely infer other minds, nor do we fully perceive them. Two, we perceive behavioral cues, but knowledge requires cognitive virtues like empathy, pattern recognition, and context awareness. And three, AI and robotics must move beyond basic emotion recognition towards social cognition and adaptive learning have been culminated in our these two lectures today. Thank you so much.